All right, hello everyone. We are on to week 6 of education psychology course, and you might notice the lighting's a little bit different than last videos. I was getting bullied by one of the students in this class, Kendra, bullied because my face was so dark, and so hopefully this works just a little bit better and the lighting is just a little bit more doesn't feel like I'm just a facade that you can see my face. I took my lamp that's in my office and I took the lampshade off, and ended up being a little bit of work. So hopefully it works all right and doesn't look funny. But anyway, we are on to week 6. We have spent 3 weeks now covering kind of some oldie goldies in the world of developmental psychology. And really today, I wanted to try to bridge the gap between theory and practice. I think if we don't take deliberate time to bridge that gap between theory and practice, these names, these 3 guys that we've studied, and really the theories that they represent, will just fade into the background of our memories. So I'm going to try to, at the end of this, you'll have an assignment that really puts theory into practice and forces you to kind of take a stance on your opinions about some things. More on that later, but that's where we're going with this. I will have guided notes for this slide, so please feel free to open up in Moodle a guided notes document. I know a lot of you have been using that class, or using the guided notes as you've been watching these videos, and so those are still available even though this is slideshow format. So feel free to print those or to just open them up and follow along, fill them out as we go. I think what we're going to cover today is really, really important, and I think it'll hopefully be very practical. So that's where we're going. So let's get into it. Start from beginning. So the goal, we're going to review, but we're going to review forward, right? I don't want to just go over Erikson, Piaget, and Vygotsky again. If I just went over these 3 people again, then we're getting into the world of rote memory, and the whole concept of you using ed psychology as a practical subject goes out the window. So we're going to review forward. We're going to go back through the theories that they represented and that they developed, but then I want to really talk about how these 3 theories, well, it's more than that, it's technically 4 theories, but how the frameworks that they developed turned into fields of study and turned into not just developmental psychology, but education psychology. So as a reminder, I'm going to move my face real quick so you can read this. These guys are developmental psychologists. Erikson was a teacher, but he actually speaks less about education than Piaget or Vygotsky. Piaget and Vygotsky both come from the world of psychology in the developmental and even behavioral sense, and then their contributions get applied to education. So that's what we're doing again. So we're gonna look at them with an eye forward towards ed psych. So quickly, let's review them and then talk about how they affected educators. So Erikson was the very first one. We studied him 3 weeks ago, and Erikson had the 8 stages of development, right? And he said that people are going to go through crises or conflicts. For example, a 0 to 2 year old is going to be wondering, can I trust the world or not? As you get older, a lot of your conflicts are regarding your efficacy. A lot of your conflicts are about initiative. Can I show initiative or not? Industry versus inferiority. Am I able to do something on my own without getting in trouble? Am I able to do things well compared to my classmates? Those are some of the crises that kids go through during their formative years. And why that matters in the field of education is that Erikson, pretty much by creating stages, said we don't get to think of kids in the same way we think of adults. again, that probably just sounds outlandish that people would have done that, but a big thing was kids have a different way of thinking, different conflicts or crises that they're going through than adults. And teachers need to recognize those because they can help or hinder that process. So it paved the way for whole child education. We are not just locking kids in a room and saying, now memorize this, now learn to do this. Here's your grammar instruction, here's your mathematics, here's your spelling, do it. There was this aspect in which case all these kids are going through crises that we need to help them navigate. So that was kind of Erikson's big contribution in the field of education. After him, oops, I skipped, we had Piaget. Piaget, he's like, these are the big three, right? But he's probably the second biggest or the biggest. He's tied for number one. And he kind of took Erikson's model and said, rather than looking at a whole lifespan, I really want to just look at that formative part of a kid's early childhood, early elementary, up into the point in which they are like functioning as an adult. So we could think of it as 0 through 18, so to speak, 0 through 25. And he kind of added on to some of the things that Erikson said. You cannot view development as static. You cannot view kids the same way we view adults. And this is where he really brought in the concrete versus the abstract. And I was reading a lot of your work that you guys did responding to Piaget. You brought out that abstract and concrete learning differentiation. It's kind of a tension, I'll be honest. I'm currently working kind of with this group of 7-year-olds doing like Sunday school lessons. And for engagement purposes, I am always so tempted to lean towards the abstract, doing things like little shows or little stories, and then they apply the story. And my thinking is the abstract is sometimes more engaging than the concrete, but then what ends up happening is I'm going to tell you a story, and then I want you to learn from it, and then the next thing you know, they're telling you stories. They're telling you what their parents did. They're telling you about this one time, because that bridge between abstract and concrete is not yet built. They are building it, but a 5-year-old really is not able to get abstract thought done. They are just simply working on face value things, concrete reasoning. Young kids struggle with the abstract. And then, conversely, as you get older, older kids start to focus more and more on the abstract and asking the bigger questions. They need to know the why behind the try, is a saying I've heard a lot in education. If I'm telling them to try, they're going to want to know why. What's the value? What's the benefit? What's the purpose? So this is not just the only stuff that Piaget came up with, but this is for this review. I thought this was the useful part for education to bring up. And just for the reviewing forward, the forward component, we're going to talk about both cognitivism and constructivism today. And Piaget had a very big role in the formation of cognitivism and constructivism. Not one or the other, but both. He's viewed as a cognitive constructivist. So so that's that. Next, we talked about our favorite, my favorite ed psych researcher, Vygotsky. As a reminder, Vygotsky grew up in USSR, and so some of the more Marxist ideas really come through in Vygotsky's theories, and yet at the same time, some of them just seem so practical. In a way, Vygotsky to me seems, at least on paper, like the guy whose thoughts are most effective in education. So despite coming from that Marxist ideology, perhaps, or borrowing things from Marxism, this is very, very useful. His main theory, of course, social activity theory, was that learning is constructed through social means, and therefore a person's teachers, which include parents, which include friends, family, it includes anybody really, their communities and their culture are defining in what a kid learns. It's not actually about the content that they're learning, it's about who they are around and the culture they're involved with. So this, of course, at the most basic level, shows up in the zone of proximal development. A kid knows something, and it requires the facilitation of a helper, a teacher, a cultural icon of some sort to help them to the next level, help them to what they don't know. Because that's how learning is done, therefore, it's iterative, meaning it repeats itself. It repeats itself with little distinctions, though. Iteration is actually probably like a computer technology for term, where you're running sequences and things happen a little bit different and you're seeing which one works best. And he was essentially saying, because learning is social, generationally it's iterative, which then leads us to conversations about systemic oppression and about cultural bias, things like that. He was also the first person to really emphasize the role of non-teachers in the education process, but yet he never minimized teachers. He pretty much just, long story short, he pretty much just saying parents need to be the first educator of a student. And then his work led to leveling. And when we can define leveling, however different schools do it, through the RTI tiers, tier 1, 2, and 3, through the idea of honors classes, title classes, student-paced learning versus teacher-paced modules, etc. A lot of that has its roots in the idea of every kid having their own zone of proximal development and needing that shepherding process to get to that outer level. So this is our review so far. We're reviewing forward. Education is changing. It's going from the teacher knows and the students are empty vessels to the teacher has something to bring, but needs to make sure they bring it in relation to that student's stage of development. And then eventually to Vygotsky, the student comes and has already been shaped and molded, and the teacher gets to be one more shaping and molding factor in that student's life, but is not the end-all be-all by any means. So where does that leave us? Really from these main three, but also the work of many others, we have come to a place, there's three primary learning theories. Now, you type in like education psychology theories, you'll get lists of 5, you'll get lists of 4, you'll get lists of 8. Like if you go onto Google and you type in learning theories, you are not going to get 3. You never will get 3. You'll always get more than 3. But really, when you start to part and parcel through the extra learning theories, it is a rendition of one of these 3 in somehow. So I've taken the liberty, and this is probably not for me to do, but I've taken the liberty to actually boil it down to these main 3, with the understanding, you guys, that we are going to get to more education theories, more learning theories that I believe are forms, or at least branches of these 3. So we have behaviorism. We haven't covered that in this class. Psychology is a prereq for this course, and psychology talks a lot about behaviorism. This is like Pavlov's dog and operant conditioning, where what you learn is a result of the stimuli that you are, I guess, subject to, and it's not about one's thoughts or feelings, which cognitivism and constructivism are both about. So behaviorism, think of it as controlling the behavior of a kid through rewards, punishments, repetition of that. Yeah, it's not really a true learning theory, it's behavior modification theory, but it is obviously lumped into these because it is a learning theory. Cognitivism's next. Sometimes it's called cognitive constructivism. That's on the internet a lot, so I wanted you guys to be aware of it. And it is the idea, very Piagetian, that learning occurs through synaptic connections. Those synaptic connections are formed when you pay attention and you assimilate new information with old, and then you're able to remember it and synthesize it with future events. That's cognitivism. It has a major focus on cognitive capability. It's really looking at the mind and the neurology of learning and saying when a person learns, the primary means of that learning is happening because they're paying attention, thinking about it, and seeking to understand it. And what Piaget essentially did is he said what they're able to cognitively collect is based on the stage they're in life. But you can almost think of cognitivism, at least this is how I think of it, as my head being like a basket. And over time, I'm able to put more things in the basket. I'm not necessarily building anything, I'm collecting things. And over time, my basket's going to get really big, and it's going to be full of many things. And so then my memory and my synthesizing abilities are how well can I go back and pull those out of my basket when there's thousands of things in there? Can I get the right thing out? So recall is really important. And its neural pathways are refined and formed from old information, new information, and that kind of process. So that comes from Piaget. Constructivism, or what we might call social constructivism, is the Vygotskian constructivism that we studied last week. And it's really this idea that learning is building new knowledge onto previous knowledge. And the building blocks are not just what happens in my brain. The building process happens because of someone outside of me. It's largely external. Now, Vygotsky he included an internal part, which is more the cognitivism, but he said the bulk of it's that external forces. We are shaped from external forces, not from internal forces. He said learning, therefore, must be active. You don't just take information in, sit down, take it in, think about it really, really hard, and then you've got it. His whole thing is it is iterated, it is repeated, it is social, it's talked about, and that's how learning occurs. So, like I said, these are just three of the most foundational learning theories. There's expressivism. There is more like a cultural constructivism. There are there's a lot of other stuff out there. There's contextualism. We could go into all the isms for learning theory, and we'll get into some more. I'm a fan of the expressivism. And there's entire school systems built on different things than these, right? But these are the primary three that led us forward in education. So how do we apply all this? Well, I thought really, really hard about how do I get my students to actually think about learning theory in a way that it's not just words on a page. And so I decided I wanted you guys to do a case study response as your assignment this week. And the case study response is going to really illustrate how these learning theories collide. There's some overlap, yes, but the collision between them is actually where I think you're going to remember this. So I invented this case study. The name Noah is a pseudonym. However, this is based off of a real student that I actually taught, and I actually wrote a letter to his parents. So the name Noah, again, fake name, but this student is 100% real. And I guess I have this setting in Glendive, but when I did it, it was in Dickinson, but whatever. So Noah is a 12-year-old boy who just moved to Glendive. His dad is in the military, so Noah has been to 5 different schools despite only being a 6th grader. So he's 12 years old. You might notice right away he's a little old to be a 6th grader, right? And he was a bit of an old student for his 6th grade year. His birthday was in early August, so he just turned 12. And in the 7 formative grades that he had gone through, kindergarten through 6th, he'd been at 5 different schools. That's a lot of different schools. And therefore, his experience in the primary subjects of English, math, social studies, and science or largely disjointed. Okay, so here's an example. This is truly an example. This is a true example, but as a third grader, Noah had a teacher that focused on the parts of speech as part of a traditional curriculum, right? This third grade teacher that Noah had been teaching a really long time and really said, in order for you to learn to write, you need to learn the parts of speech: nouns, verbs, adverbs, adjectives. So as a third grader, he was getting all of that. Then in fourth grade, he moved to Dickinson. Again, this is a made-up town. This isn't actually true. His fourth grade teacher did not believe in teaching grammar through the parts of speech or grammar at all. That's kind of a new way of thinking. That is a very common trend right now, and it's a debate. Do you teach grammar or not? And this teacher said students need to learn to write complete sentences by seeing them. They need to learn to write a complete sentence not by knowing their noun verb constructions, their subject and their predicate. They don't need to know the grammatical construction. They need to be able to see it and know this is complete or incomplete, kind of in the same way we learn to speak. Take Lit and Literacy. We're going to talk all about this in Lit and Literacy. EDU 231 registration opens next week. It's going to be an awesome class. Anyway, so just for right now, I mean, this case study will continue, but which of the three learning theories would suggest that the lack of continuity is a problem? Take just a moment and answer yourself. I'm going to answer the question, but just think about it. Would behaviorism say that having a different teacher, well, we all have different teachers going up through the grade levels in the American system, but having completely disjointed school systems, different curriculums altogether, zero continuity, which learning theory would be like, that's a big problem? Another second or two to think about it. You can pause the video if you want. While both cognitivism and constructivism would say that's a problem, the one that would really say, ooh, Noah's going to be way behind, would be the constructivist approach, because it's saying learning really only happens when you build upon something. Remember, a cognitivist is like a basket and says you can add things to that basket, but the best learning is when you can retrieve it out of that basket quickly and easily, and you can connect the things in the basket as well. Constructivism says learning is building, and this poor kid has not had any building on the previous foundation. It's like pouring concrete at one construction site, and then, oh, we're going to go pour concrete at this construction site, and then next school goes, hey, we're going to build a frame, but that concrete's not going to work. You didn't get our concrete. You need our concrete. Oh, you didn't get it. We're moving on, right? So constructivism would say Noah's in trouble. Let's continue our case study. I'm getting into the metaphorical world. Hopefully you all can get this abstract thinking, as you should, given our stages. So let's say now Noah's in your class. You're teaching ELA. I picked this because that's what I taught. I know you're not all going to teach English, but he's in your general ELA class at Washington Middle School. You had all of your students do an NWEA/MAPS reading assessment to diagnose their current abilities, and Noah scored a 182. And it's the lowest in your class. A 182 is low. 182 in 6th grade would kind of put him in that 2nd to 3rd grade range, right? Take Lit and Literacy. We'll talk about why that 2nd to 3rd grade range is a big deal. Then, a week later, you have your students popcorn read a 4th grade level text, right? They should be able to knock out that. They're 6th graders. If they're on grade level readers, 4th grade level text, they should be able to pop this thing out. No problem. But when Noah is called by a classmate, he puts his finger on the page, uses his finger, and he starts to read slowly. His out loud reading is choppy. He's not ashamed or embarrassed. Oh, sorry, I missed a part. This is really important. He seems to focus on one word at a time rather than the sentence as a whole. Okay? He's reading a word, not a sentence. He's reading a word, not a paragraph. He's not ashamed or embarrassed because when you ask him about it later, he says he wants to get better. He's not ashamed of it. The only reason I include this note is because Noah was a real student, and that was his attitude towards it. So I was basing it, and I was like, Noah, I almost said his real name. Ugh. Said, Noah, you seem to struggle during the popcorn reading. Do you want me to make sure you don't get called on next time? He said, no, actually, I want to get to be a better reader. So yeah, I'll do it out loud. I know I'm slow, but he was comfortable with it, so that's cool. Okay, so here's what you got though. Student bounced around 5 different schools in 7 years. His reading is placing him at a 2nd or 3rd grade level, which would essentially be telling us we need to teach him to read, right? We don't need to teach him to read better or comprehend better. We need to teach him to read. Literacy, another plug. Teach him to decode words, put them together in sentences, and read it fluently. We got to get that, okay? That's what these assessments are telling us. Okay, that leads us to the question. We have to teach a kid to read in 6th grade. What do you do? What do you do? Cognitivism would suggest that Noah is going to be behind, but a cognitivist would say if he pays attention in class, gets the extra help that he needs, works hard, and then does also receive some direct 2nd grade, 3rd grade phonics fluency instruction, he will be able to get it. Cognitivism would pitch the growth mindset essentially and would say, hey, in order for this kid to do well, they have to have this attitude right. They have to get their attitude right and then get the help they need, and we will get them caught up. Okay? So that's a cognitivist. I'm not saying they're right. I'm not saying they're wrong. There's probably a lot of truth in this. Then we've got a constructivist. Constructivist would say, uh-oh, this is big time. He doesn't actually have a foundation yet, so his actual knowledge of a subject is probably even lower than what he can demonstrate because he has never built upon a foundation. So we don't just teach phonics and fluency. We need to start with phonemic awareness. Let's start at the very, very basic so we can expand out and build around the right concrete. Even though fluency seems to be the problem, let's start with phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, some people call it. Additionally, a constructivist would also go, uh-oh, he's been taught 5 different ways. Now we're 6th, right? So he needs to unlearn certain things. We need to get a really good diagnostic so that we know what to unteach him. Okay? And then in order to do this, he needs intensive intervention. He needs intensive intervention. A constructivist would say, in fact, we need to pull him out of regular ELA class. We need to put him in a small group reading class. You see the difference between cognitivism and constructivism, right? They're both coming from good places. Constructivism is saying this is a foundation level issue that needs to be remedied from the foundation level. Cognitivism says this is a mismatch and we need to get to start blending things together and pulling out the right stuff. But in order for us to do that, he needs to have the right mindset. Does that make sense? So cognitivism is going to focus on Noah's attitude. Constructivism is going to focus more on what the teacher does. Remember, constructivism is very social. This leads us to your assignment. You have to do something. You have to do something to help Noah. You have a lot of choices. And to make this assignment easier, this is not always the truth, but to make this assignment easier, I'm going to assume these things. The parents are going to help. They will do whatever you ask them to. The parents will help, so you can utilize parental help as needed. And the principal will move the schedule if you need to. I only have 25 seconds to finish my video. So the parents will help, the principal will move him, and here are your choices. Put him in a different class, give him different intervention time, give him additional work at home, put them in a study hall, an after-school reading intervention, or a combination of any of these.